So hi, before I get started, I just want to say that these slides do make mentions to sexual abuse, but I will not be talking about any specific details. The talk will focus on people's practices and strategies for sharing intimate content. So sharing intimate content is common. Although this is a difficult thing to measure, estimates from psychology research have found that as many as 8 in 10 adults in the US share intimate content. And we refer to intimate content as images or videos that show a nude or semi-nude subject, contain intimate body parts, and/or intend to arouse. Unfortunately, a White House study in 2022 found that 1 in 6 adults have had their intimate content distributed without their consent. So the non-consensual distribution of intimate imagery, or NDII, is a form of sexual abuse, and it can lead to a number of impacts. So just to name 2, there are mental health consequences similar to other forms of sexual abuse, and increased risk of doxing and other forms of online hate and harassment. And again, this is just to name a few of the impacts. And what's happening here is that societal norms and the lack of technological mitigations that exist are putting people at risk. So the research that we conducted focuses on proactive mitigation strategies against the non-consensual distribution of intimate content, or NDII. And we investigated the context. We wanted to know, what are people's use cases for sharing intimate content? We also wanted to know, well, what are the technologies they're using, and what are their threat models, and how do they defend against those threat models? So we interviewed 52 adults living in European countries who share intimate content. And 28 shared this for recreational purposes, and 24 shared for commercial purposes. And 22 were victim survivors of NDII, so this includes participants that were recreational and also commercial. And today, I'm just gonna give an overview of all the things we found, so please read the paper. And the first thing is that people share intimate content in so many different settings. They share with strangers. So for example, one participant told us that she shared in a body positivity group on social media. You might also see people sharing intimate content in the context of a new relationship. So someone meeting someone on a dating app and beginning a relationship with them, in established relationships, which you might typically think of, and also commercial platforms. And there are so many different structures in which people share intimate content. So you may typically think of just sharing intimate content with one specific person. But again, people are sharing the same image to many people or to a group. So as P3 shared with us, I've shared them with a lot of people. I've shared them with romantic partners. I've sent them to strangers on the internet, like on social media. I sometimes search for people looking for intimate content and then send them. So overall, our participants used 40+ platforms. This was quite a lot, and really what we observe here is that any platform that can be used to create, share, store visual content is likely being used for intimate content. So what this really means is that platforms from the beginning need to design for intimate content as a use case. Okay, so P12 told us, I've got like Telegram, I've got Signal, I've got WhatsApp, I've got Kik, you name it, I've got it. Occasionally, if there's something really large that requires drop boxes and that sort of thing, I'll do that. So what are people concerned about when sharing intimate content? So even though a lot of people do actually trust the people they're sharing intimate content with, it doesn't mean that they're not afraid of the consequences. They still have passive and background fears that their content is going to be reshared without their consent. So this was a common concern that is being perpetuated by the stigma and also the victim blaming that comes along with sharing intimate content. But alongside these concerns, there are a host of other concerns that people have that don't relate to their direct recipient. And this could be from accidental viewing of this content, or from data breach, or having images otherwise being compromised. Someone did share with us that they were very concerned about employees at some of these platforms purposely looking through their databases for intimate content. So to protect themselves, our participants used technological strategies when they were available to them, such as different safety features that might be in different apps, and also interpersonal strategies to fill in the gaps of what technology cannot do for people. And to defend against recipient resharing, I'm just going to A few examples. Please read the paper for more complete discussion. So before sharing, people might set explicit rules with their recipients. They might say to them, please don't screenshot anything I share with you. They also have their own mechanisms of vetting people that they have a less established relationship with, and they're just establishing that trust with. So while sharing, they might use in-app features like expiring messages that disappear at a preset time, or they might make use of screenshot notifications that let you know if someone screenshots. And after sharing, they might even ask people to delete content that they have shared, or when available, people might use the message unsend feature to remove intimate content from a message history. So another concern our participants had, defending against identification. So if intimate content were to be shared without their consent, they wanted to defend proactively against identification as a means of creating plausible deniability or to protect against additional harm. So one of the most popular strategies that over 50% of participants shared with us that they did was to avoid capturing any identifying information in the first place. So they did a lot of intensive things like covering up their tattoos, making sure their face was not in an image, or even choosing a more neutral background. So someone told us that they were very cognizant of the items in their background and the language that was on, for example, a shampoo bottle, because that in itself, in a European context, could reveal what country they're in. So participants also use metadata removal to make sure that additional information isn't revealed. Okay, so in the paper we talk a bit more about these non-recipient threats that I introduced earlier and how people defend against them, but I will not be covering that today. Okay, so I talked about how people use different features. Excuse the formatting. This is coming from the re-download. We did a landscape analysis to assess the availability of different features in popular platforms, and I think because of the formatting, some of the features are cut off. But on the left, you have some features that our participants mentioned, and you'll see that this also includes some that I haven't actually discussed in this talk. So a dark blue just represents that this is available in some mode. For example, Instagram has a vanish mode that has some of these features. Light blue means that this is a paid feature, or sometimes a participant would have to repurpose an existing feature to get the desired functionality they wanted. And as you can see, the coverage is a little bit patchy, and there is not wide availability for all of these features. And even when they do exist, if they're in a specific mode, there's not a lot of room for customization. Okay. So before I begin talking about the recommendations, I want to emphasize again here that using protective strategies is time-consuming and it's difficult. As P33 says, I spend more time scrubbing personal info off my pictures, putting them in private folders, than actually taking said pictures. The learning curve is steep. And when sharing intimate content, participants were highly aware of the risks of NDII and the limitations of all of these existing technical defenses. So for example, people if you do have screenshot notifications turned on, this could be bypassed by taking a photo with a secondary device. And rather than focusing on complete prevention, participants use these strategies as a form of harm reduction. So the goal that we have in mind is to create friction. That way we can slow the spread of NDII. So no matter how much features people put into safety, there's always going to be a risk. But as long as the features and the way you're doing it has the minimum level of safety, that will stop most people. So moving on to the recommendations, I'm going to highlight just a few. Alongside, I may show a wireframe of what we came up with as just one possible solution, just as a means of kind of demonstrating what we're talking about. So most participants are using their default messaging app for sharing intimate content and wanted a full suite of safety features. But as you saw in that landscape analysis, their availability is pretty patchy. At other times, they do exist, but people don't actually know they exist, to find them. So an important thing is to increase the availability and also the visibility of those features. And participants wanted ways of customizing those features, of toggling, controlling them to better reflect their dynamic use cases and just the dynamic nature of what trust looks like in human relationships. So for example, they wanted more granular control, like being able to apply expectation to a single message or being able to password protect a single message. But manipulating these features based on all these different contexts and different interactions, this can be burdensome. So participants suggested offering some sort of preset mode with settings that they could modify themselves. And participants also wanted more technological support for the manual strategies that they're already doing, which are currently time-consuming. So as I mentioned, people do spend a lot of time making sure identifying features aren't being captured. An example could be building more built-in editing tools for blurring people's faces or tattoos. And finally, we did identify some directions for future research. So though people are using these technical features, participants often realize that these protections could be bypassed, as I mentioned. And there were concerns that the safety features themselves could actually incentivize the very same behaviors they're actually seeking to prevent against when they're using them. So more research is needed to actually understand what is this likelihood? In what context does this actually occur in? How do we communicate these risks when people are using these features with some sort of expectation? So as this quote says, expiring messages sort of invite people trying to screenshot because it almost creates this environment of, oh, this is a secret, which sort of invites people to be like, I'm going to try to hold on to it. And many participants also wanted more technologies for identifying non-consensual sharing when it's happening. And when we talk to them about some existing solutions, so for example, there are some hash-based solutions that allow people to compare hashes of images to more quickly identify if someone's image has been shared without their consent. There was a mix of both interest and also skepticism. So participants had concerns about the storage of these hashes and their ability to be used to reconstruct the original image. So there is a need for more research to understand what is the likelihood of these reconstruction attacks. There are also other concerns such as high positive rates. In this context, if you receive notification that your image has been shared without your consent, but it's a false positive, that can be highly distressing. And lastly, in many contexts, such as high-risk ones, safety features like expiring messages or unsending a message can offer a lot of needed protection. But in the event of NDII, it might be necessary to have a record of a sender, a recipient, what the message was, in order if someone were to decide to pursue legal action. But if these messages are disappearing, and that is also a feature people want to protect themselves, we need to figure out how do we balance content control with harm documentation. So new design ideas should be explored to resolve this tension that we're identifying. And I want to conclude on this note. What we saw is that proactive protection is really difficult. Our participants were really hard on themselves. They critiqued themselves for not doing enough, for not implementing enough behaviors, but they also found this really genuinely difficult. It was hard to understand what to do, and people don't necessarily have good advice for this either. So we conceptualize this as a form of victim blaming that comes from the absence of protective technological design. And this does communicate the belief implicitly that a victim survivor of sexual violence is responsible for preventing the consequences. And as a result, it's really critical that we reallocate responsibility from individuals to platforms and technologists. As P31 put it, everyone does it. It's part of how we sort of sexually express ourselves or make money. If something does happen and it does go badly, then you feel like, oh, well, everyone's just saying I shouldn't have done it. So somehow it's my fault, even though it's obviously not. So lastly, we've created some personas that reflect the user needs that were shared with us. We also created some additional wireframes for design ideas that we had based on this research. So please feel free to check that out along with the paper. And that's all I have. Thank you.